Every man, if he dares to examine himself honestly, discovers that within him live two distinct selves. There is the old self, the one shaped by habit, fear, laziness, compromise, indulgence, and years of drifting. This old self clings to comfort, postpones discipline, avoids truth, and whispers that change is unnecessary or impossible. And then there is the potential self, the one that could exist if courage, virtue, and clarity were embraced. The Stoics teach us that transformation can never occur unless the old self is first destroyed. One must die for the other to live. Seneca put it without mercy. It is not that we have a short life, but that we waste much of it. The old self is the very embodiment of wasted life. It wanders through days without aim, consumes time as though it were infinite, complains while doing nothing to change. To destroy this self is not cruelty, but justice. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, knew this struggle intimately. His meditations are filled with stern reminders to himself to stop postponing, to live as though death were near, to act with virtue today, not tomorrow. You will not live another 1,000 years. While you still can, become good. The emperor scolded himself like a child because he understood that the old Marcus, prone to vanity, hesitation, distraction, had to die each morning so the wiser Marcus could be reborn. This process of destruction is not a single dramatic event, but a discipline. It is not enough to wish for transformation. Wishing leaves the old self untouched. Seneca recommended ending each day as though it were a complete life, reviewing, condemning weakness, discarding excuses. At night, he let the old self die. At dawn, he resolved to rise renewed. This is how transformation becomes real, not through fantasies of sudden rebirth, but through daily death of the habits that weaken us. Epictetus, once a slave, understood this more than anyone. He had no power over his chains, no wealth, no privilege. Yet he declared, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Freedom is not political, but internal. The old self waits for rescue, from fortune, from others, from circumstance. The new self understands that no rescuer is coming. You must build alone. This solitude is essential. Others may advise, but they cannot do the work. The hammer of discipline and the chisel of reason are in your own hands. You are both the sculptor and the stone. But let us not pretend destruction is pleasant. To kill the old self is painful. Habits feel like home, even when they poison. Excuses feel like shelter, even when they chain. Comfort feels like life, even when it rots. To leave them behind feels like tearing flesh. Yet the Stoics remind us that what is painful is often what is good. Epictetus advised his students to practice voluntary hardship, to fast, to endure cold, to train the body and mind so they would not fear loss. This was rehearsal for the destruction of the old self. For each indulgence you surrender, each excuse you silence, each comfort you abandon is a part of the old you laid to rest. To rebuild yourself alone is to accept the loneliness of true change. The crowd will not cheer you for rejecting comfort. Friends may not understand when you step away from distractions. The old self within you will protest violently, urging compromise, demanding that you stop. But Marcus Aurelius warned himself, "Stop wandering. You are not likely to read your notebooks again, or the histories of ancient Romans and Greeks. Cast away your thirst for books, that you may not die murmuring, but in serenity, truly." He meant that the old self murmurs, delays, postpones, always busy but never alive. The new self acts. The destruction of the old you is not hatred of yourself, it is the refusal to remain asleep. Imagine carrying a corpse on your back each day, the weight, the stench, the decay. That is what it means to live without transformation. The corpse is your old self, your fears, excuses, and wasted years. To cling to it is madness. To bury it is liberation. Only when you put it down can you walk freely. And what emerges after destruction? Not perfection, but possibility. The man who destroys the old self makes space for virtue. He can begin to rebuild with courage as foundation, discipline as walls, wisdom as roof, justice as light. This construction takes time, but it cannot begin until demolition clears the ground. Seneca compared philosophy to medicine, unpleasant in taste, but healing in effect. Destroying the old self is bitter, but it cures the disease of wasted life. Therefore, the first Stoic insight is this: you must have the courage to let the old you die. Do not carry him further. Do not excuse his weakness. Alone, in silence, confront what you have been and refuse to remain it. Each day, tear down a fragment, an indulgence, an excuse, a fear. Each night, let that weaker portion of you be buried. Each morning, resolve to stand anew. The Stoics remind us transformation is not given, it is built. And before you build, you must destroy. To destroy the old you is one act of courage. To rebuild yourself alone is another. Most men want witnesses, applause, or companions when they begin their so-called transformations. They speak loudly of resolutions, post their intentions for all to see, and wait for validation. But the Stoics warn that real transformation is born in solitude, not in spectacle. Seneca cautioned, associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. The process is mutual, for men learn while they teach. Yet he also knew that much of the work is done silently, alone, when no audience exists to flatter effort. Why solitude? Because the old self thrives in noise. It finds refuge in distractions, in the opinions of the crowd, in the excuses of company. How easy it is to justify weakness when surrounded by those who share it. If everyone is indulgent, you feel no shame in indulgence. If everyone wastes time, your waste feels normal. Marcus Aurelius warned against this trap of imitation. The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts, and thoughts are dyed most quickly by the company you keep. Solitude, therefore, is not escape but purification. When you withdraw into yourself, you confront the raw reality of who you are. There are no excuses, no applause, no masks. Just you, your choices, and your thoughts. Epictetus insisted on this inner confrontation. He told his students, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid, because growth in solitude does not look glamorous. While the crowd seeks entertainment, you sit with silence. While the crowd indulges, you abstain. While the crowd demands applause, you discipline yourself with no witness. To them, you look strange, perhaps even foolish. But this strangeness is the seed of transformation. The old self resists solitude fiercely. It craves constant noise because silence exposes its weakness. In quiet hours, excuses sound hollow. Comfort reveals itself as decay. Fear is unmasked as imagination. Without the noise of others, you must admit that the old you survives only because you have sheltered it. To sit alone is to hear clearly the voice of reason you have ignored. Seneca practiced this daily, examining himself each night, replaying conversations, judging where he faltered, and resolving to change. Alone in his chamber, he held trial against himself, condemning the old habits, acquitting the virtues. This inner court is the place where the old self dies and the new one takes form. But solitude is not isolation from humanity. The Stoics did not despise others. They saw themselves as citizens of the world, parts of a greater whole. Marcus Aurelius wrote often of the need for cooperation. We are made for cooperation, like hands, like feet, like eyelids. Yet he also retreated into himself for strength. People look for retreats in the country, by the sea, or in the mountains, he wrote. But there is nowhere a person can find more peaceful retreat than in his own mind. Solitude, then, is not abandonment of others, but training for service. By rebuilding yourself alone, you become stronger for the community you later rejoin. In modern life, solitude is rarer than in ancient Rome. We are assaulted by endless noise, news, devices, chatter, comparison. The sabotaging mind thrives here, scattering attention until nothing remains. To step away, to sit in silence without distraction, is to wage war on the old self. Most cannot endure it. They fear boredom, but boredom is merely the detox of a distracted mind. To rebuild alone is to endure this detox until clarity emerges. Marcus urged himself to simplify, to ignore the clamor, to return always to reason. In solitude, you too can strip away what is unnecessary until only what is true remains. There is also a sacred loneliness in rebuilding alone. Others may encourage, but they cannot feel your inner battles. Only you know the weight of your fears, the pull of your habits, the depth of your excuses. No one else can lift them for you. Epictetus reminded his students that philosophy is not a matter of words, but of deeds. You can listen to lectures, read books, quote wisdom, but unless you act in your own solitude, nothing changes. The old you laughs at empty words. Only action in silence proves seriousness. But solitude is not only about discipline, it is also about vision. In the quiet, you ask, who do I wish to become? What virtues do I want to embody? What habits must die for those virtues to live? This vision cannot be borrowed from others. It must rise from your own reason. Seneca admired those who patterned themselves after great men, but reminded that imitation is only the beginning. Eventually, the new self must be your own creation. Alone, you design the architecture of the man you will become. And solitude demands patience. The old self dies slowly, clinging to every crevice of thought. Do not expect to erase decades of habit in days. Marcus Aurelius scolded himself for repeating the same mistakes, yet reminded himself that progress is not perfection. Do not expect Plato's Republic, he wrote, but be content if even the smallest thing is achieved and consider it no small matter. Each small victory in solitude, the resisted indulgence, the controlled temper, the honest reflection, is demolition of the old and laying of bricks for the new. Thus, the second Stoic insight is this: transformation requires solitude. Destroying the old you is impossible if you remain drowned in the noise of others, lost in imitation, shielded by excuses. Alone, you see clearly. Alone, you judge honestly. Alone, you begin to rebuild. It is not loneliness, but liberation. The crowd may misunderstand, but your soul will recognize its rebirth. Remember Marcus's reminder: the best retreat is within. Go there daily, rebuild in silence, and return to the world stronger. The old self is not destroyed in one dramatic moment. It clings like ivy, its roots wrapped tightly around every corner of the mind. Habits are those roots. They are the unseen forces that guide your mornings, shape your reactions, dictate your cravings, and sabotage your efforts before you even notice. To rebuild yourself, you must not only confront these habits, you must tear them out by their roots, or else the old self will keep sprouting back. The Stoics were relentless in their war against habit. They understood that human beings are creatures of repetition. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that his thoughts were seeds that would grow into character. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Habits of thought, resentment, envy, procrastination are just as dangerous as habits of body. Left unchecked, they paint the soul in dark colors until you no longer recognize yourself. Rebuilding requires stripping away this old paint, even if it means scraping until it hurts. Seneca warned that men often mistake habit for nature. What is customary begins to seem natural, and what is natural begins to seem wrong. The old self lives under this delusion. It says, I cannot change, this is who I am. But the Stoics refused this excuse. They insisted that while you cannot choose your birth, your body, or your fortune, you can always choose your habits of mind. Freedom is not absence of chains on the body, but mastery over the habits that bind the soul. Habits sabotage because they operate silently. You do not choose them consciously each time, they choose for you. The man who has formed the habit of anger reacts before he thinks. The man who has formed the habit of indulgence reaches for comfort before he reflects. The man who has formed the habit of delay always says tomorrow, even when tomorrow never comes. Epictetus scolded his students about this unconscious slavery. If you are not diligent, habit will return. Transformation demands vigilance. But how do you break chains that feel like part of yourself? The Stoics prescribed awareness first. Marcus Aurelius examined his own soul daily, noting where habits of vanity or resentment crept in. Seneca recommended nightly reviews of the day's actions, judging what was done well and what was done poorly. Awareness shines a light on the silent roots of habit. Once exposed, they can no longer hide as just who I am. They are revealed as choices repeated, and therefore choices that can be replaced. Second, the Stoics practice replacement, not mere removal. To destroy a habit, you must plant another in its place. If anger is your habit, cultivate patience. If indulgence is your habit, cultivate discipline. If procrastination is your habit, cultivate immediate action. Habits cannot be erased into nothing. They must be redirected toward virtue. Third, voluntary hardship was a weapon against destructive habits. Seneca practiced days of poverty, eating coarse bread, wearing rough clothes, to remind himself that luxury was not necessity. In doing so, he weakened the habit of dependence on comfort. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself not to complain when tasks were unpleasant, for habit could train him to see labor as natural. Epictetus told his students to endure insult without reaction, breaking the habit of offense. Each hardship endured is an axe swung at the root of an old habit. Modern life strengthens destructive habits in ways the Stoics never faced. Devices cultivate the habit of distraction. Markets cultivate the habit of endless craving. Culture cultivates the habit of outrage. The old self thrives in such an environment, feasting on habits disguised as normal. To rebuild yourself alone means rejecting what the world normalizes. It means choosing silence over constant noise, simplicity over constant craving, patience over constant outrage. To do so feels unnatural at first, because habit masquerades as nature. But as Seneca reminds us, custom is not truth. You must decide which customs you will keep. The old self also hides behind collective habits. When everyone around you indulges, it feels strange to abstain. When everyone complains, it feels unnatural to remain calm. But Marcus Aurelius urged himself to remain a philosopher even among non-philosophers. The world is mere change, and this life is but opinion. The opinion of the crowd is often nothing more than habit repeated loudly. To rebuild yourself, you must resist the comfort of joining their chorus. Destroying habits is not glamorous work. It is tedious, unrelenting, and often invisible. You will resist indulgence when no one is watching. You will wake early when no one applauds. You will remain silent in anger when others rage. Yet each act is a strike against the old self. Seneca compared progress to building, one brick laid daily, often unnoticed, but eventually a fortress. The fortress of the new self is built not in one dramatic gesture, but in daily resistance to habit. The Stoics also knew that relapse was inevitable. Old habits return like ghosts, whispering that change was an illusion. Marcus scolded himself for repeating faults he thought he had overcome. But instead of despairing, he reminded himself that progress is measured not by perfection, but by persistence. The old self dies not in a single blow, but in 1,000 cuts. Each relapse is another opportunity to strike again. Thus, the third Stoic insight is this: to destroy the old you, you must break the chains of habit. Do not mistake them for nature. They are choices repeated, and therefore they can be unchosen. Alone, in silence, examine them. Replace them with habits of virtue. Practice hardship to weaken their hold. Persist when they return. For the old self is not a monster outside you, but a set of patterns within you. Destroy the patterns, and the self that clung to them dies. In their place rises the man who acts not from habit, but from reason, not from impulse, but from virtue. If the old self is comfortable, it is because you have sheltered it. If it survives, it is because you have fed it with ease, with softness, with the endless pursuit of safety. To destroy it, you must deny it food. You must light the fire of voluntary hardship and walk into it willingly. The Stoics insisted that strength cannot be built in the absence of struggle. Seneca wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." The old self avoids friction. The new self seeks it as fuel. Voluntary hardship is the deliberate embrace of discomfort, not for the sake of suffering itself, but for the training of the soul. Epictetus, once a slave, understood this truth intimately. He urged his students to deny themselves luxuries, to sleep on hard ground, to wear coarse clothing, to fast, to endure heat and cold without complaint. Difficulties show what men are, he said. If you shield yourself from every difficulty, you never discover what you are. And if you never discover what you are, how can you rebuild? The old self thrives in comfort. It whispers, "Why suffer needlessly? Or why go without? Why not enjoy what is available?" It sounds reasonable, but reason without discipline is only excuse. Seneca practiced poverty for days at a time, not because he lacked wealth, but because he feared dependency. He wanted to know that if fortune stripped everything from him, he would not collapse. Set aside a certain number of days, he advised, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself all the while, "Is this the condition that I feared?" By practicing hardship, he destroyed the old self's fear of deprivation. Marcus Aurelius, ruling Rome, had every luxury at his disposal. Yet he constantly reminded himself to live simply, to eat as a man, not as an emperor. He scolded himself when he grew soft, urging his soul to endure labor as natural. Do not indulge in dreams of what you have not, but reckon up the chief of the blessings you do possess, and then thankfully remember how you would crave for them if they were not in your possession. Gratitude, simplicity, endurance. These were his shields against the sabotage of comfort. Why does voluntary hardship matter so much? Because fortune will impose hardship whether you choose it or not. Illness, loss, betrayal, poverty, aging, death. These visit every man. If you have trained for nothing but comfort, you will collapse when they arrive. The old self will die then too, but it will drag you with it. The new self, however, dies daily by choice and is reborn stronger. He rehearses hardship so that when real hardship comes, he greets it not as enemy but as teacher. Modern light resists this teaching violently. We are surrounded by machines designed to erase difficulty, climate control, instant food, endless entertainment. Each comfort whispers, "This is normal, this is progress, this is life." And so the old self grows fat and weak, terrified of any inconvenience. A moment of hunger feels unbearable, a delay intolerable, a silence suffocating. The Stoics would look upon us and ask, how can men so surrounded by luxury hope to be strong? Only by rebelling against ease, by choosing difficulty in a world that sells comfort. Practical hardship is not about grand gestures, but daily training. Wake earlier than you wish. Delay a meal to test hunger. Take a cold shower. Walk when you could drive. Refuse unnecessary luxuries. Endure insult without retaliation. Each act is a blade against the old self, cutting away its dependency on comfort. Each act is also a brick in the new self, building resilience that no fortune can take. Epictetus urged his students to be ready at all times to lose what they loved, not with despair, but with dignity. Only one who has practiced hardship can do this. There is also a spiritual dimension to hardship. It teaches gratitude. Bread tastes richer when you have known hunger. Warmth feels deeper when you have known cold. Silence feels sacred when you have endured noise. The old self takes everything for granted, always demanding more. The new self, trained in hardship, learns to give thanks for little. Seneca observed, "He is a great man who uses earthenware dishes as if they were silver, but he is equally great who uses silver as if it were earthenware." The man who has practiced hardship can enjoy both poverty and wealth without slavery to either. Yet voluntary hardship is not about punishing yourself endlessly. It is about reminding yourself that you can live with less, endure more, and still remain free. The old self is terrified of loss because it cannot imagine survival without abundance. The new self laughs at loss because it has practiced living with little. When fortune strikes, the old self collapses. The new self stands calm, already acquainted with pain. To destroy the old you, then, you must light this fire willingly. Seek out challenges, not for pride, but for growth. Embrace what is unpleasant, not to boast, but to train. Rebuild yourself alone by learning to endure without complaint, to live simply, to give thanks even in scarcity. The Stoics did not fear hardship because they made hardship their ally. Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus. They were not superhuman. They were men who chose friction so that their souls would be polished into strength. Thus, the fourth Stoic insight is this: transformation requires voluntary hardship. Do not shield yourself from discomfort. Train with it. Let it strip the old self of its softness. For the man who endures willingly is unbreakable, but the man who clings to comfort is already broken. Now some exciting news. Our channel now offers a members club. By joining it, you'll unlock exclusive benefits, deeper content dives, and personal insights. Join us on this journey and let's build a meaningful life together. And I also humbly ask you to leave a comment, as it helps my channel immensely. If you do not know what to comment, just write "better every day" so I know you reached this far. And don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Also, I've linked some books on Stoicism that helped me become the man I am today, and will also help you achieve a Stoic mindset. If voluntary hardship burns away the weakness of the old self, then silence is the forge where the new self is shaped. Most men live without ever pausing to examine themselves. They speak endlessly, they consume endlessly, they react endlessly, but they rarely stop to ask, "What am I becoming?" The Stoics placed self-reflection at the center of transformation. Without it, hardship becomes mere suffering, and philosophy becomes mere theory. With it, every day becomes material for rebirth. Seneca practiced this discipline nightly. He described it vividly in his letters. When the day ended, he would sit in silence, replaying each action, asking where he had faltered, where he had acted well, and where he could improve. "When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent," he wrote, "I examine my entire day and go back over what I have done and said. I hide nothing from myself. I pass nothing by." This ruthless honesty was not self-hatred, but self-mastery. For the old self thrives in unexamined days, but the new self grows only through judgment and correction. Marcus Aurelius left us his meditations, not intended for publication, but for personal correction. These writings are not polished essays, but raw conversations with himself, reminders, scoldings, encouragements. "Do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about others," he wrote, chastising himself to return inward. His journal was not performance, it was a mirror. He destroyed the old Marcus daily by confronting his vanity, laziness, or anger, and rebuilt the new Marcus by anchoring himself in reason and virtue. His empire was not Rome, it was his own soul. Epictetus, too, urged constant examination. He warned that unless you test your impressions, they will rule you. When you are about to undertake an action, he said, remind yourself what kind of action it is. If you go out to bathe, place before your mind what commonly happens at a bath. Some will splash you, some will jostle, some will abuse, some will steal. Thus prepared, you will undertake the action serenely. What is this but self-reflection applied in advance? It is looking inward before outward, disciplining judgment before surrendering to impulse. The sabotaging mind avoids reflection because it fears truth. Silence reveals procrastination, weakness, hypocrisy. It is easier to remain busy, noisy, distracted than to sit with the mirror of conscience. But the Stoics insist that silence is non-negotiable. Without it, you remain blind, walking in circles, repeating the same patterns. With it, you begin to see clearly the outlines of the old self, and you begin to carve them away. Modern life makes silence rare. We fill every moment with sound, music, conversation, news, scrolling. To sit alone without stimulation feels unbearable. Yet this very discomfort proves its necessity. If you cannot be alone with your thoughts, then your thoughts are not your own. They are foreign tenants, unexamined and untrained. The old self thrives in such chaos, feeding on distraction. To rebuild, you must reclaim silence as daily practice. Reflection is not mere rumination. It is structured judgment. The Stoics used three measures: truth, virtue, and control. First, is what I think or fear true, or is it illusion? Second, is what I desire aligned with virtue or merely pleasure? Third, is what I lament within my control or beyond it? By testing impressions through these measures, they cut through self-deception. The old self falls apart under such interrogation, for it cannot survive exposure to reason. Self-reflection also requires courage, because it often reveals that you are your own enemy. Seneca admitted that he still pursued wealth and recognition even while preaching against them. Marcus confessed his irritation with others even while reminding himself to remain patient. Epictetus scolded himself for moments of indulgence. None of them pretended perfection. Reflection was not to create the illusion of virtue, but to remind them to keep fighting for it. The old self does not die quietly, it resists. Reflection is the daily blade that keeps cutting until resistance weakens. There is also a humility in self-reflection. To examine yourself honestly is to admit that you are not finished, that you require work, that the self you carry is not final. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the greatest empire, still confessed in his journal that he struggled to live up to his philosophy. If the ruler of the world still needed correction, how much more do we? Reflection prevents arrogance by showing us daily that transformation is a process, never a possession. Practicing silence also teaches patience. The old self wants dramatic change, the illusion of sudden rebirth. The new self knows that change is brick by brick, reflection by reflection. By reviewing yourself daily, you see gradual progress, fewer angry outbursts, more disciplined mornings, deeper gratitude. This slow growth humbles you, but also strengthens you, for it cannot be stolen. The man who grows by reflection is not dependent on fortune. His wealth is in his discipline. In solitude, reflection can feel brutal. You will see things you wish were not true, your cowardice, your vanity, your weakness. But this honesty is liberation. Better to know your enemy than to fight shadows. The old self is clever, hiding behind excuses and appearances. Reflection strips away its disguises. Each confession is demolition, each correction is construction. Thus, the fifth Stoic insight is this: embrace the silence of self-reflection. Destroy the old you by exposing him daily in the mirror of conscience. Rebuild the new you by measuring thoughts and actions against truth, virtue, and control. Do not fear what you see. Fear only blindness. As Seneca reminded, no man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. Reflection is adversity of the soul, and through it, you prove yourself anew each day. If the old self clings to anything, it is attachment to possessions, to praise, to people, to the illusion that permanence can be found in what is temporary. To destroy the old you must learn detachment, for nothing sabotages transformation more than chains disguised as treasures. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. He repeated this not to cultivate despair, but to strip away illusion. Detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. The refusal to let what you cannot keep dictate who you become. Attachments shape the old self because they build identity on shifting ground. One man believes it his wealth. When fortune strips it away, he collapses. Another builds his worth on reputation. When slander arrives, he dissolves in anger. Another ties his existence to another's approval. When that person withdraws, he feels erased. Epictetus scorned this dependence. If you wish to be a man of freedom, do not desire what depends on others. The old self is always enslaved to externals. The new self must detach to remain free. Detachment is not abandonment of responsibility. Marcus Aurelius loved his family, governed his empire, cared for his soldiers. Seneca wrote tenderly to his friends. Epictetus taught with compassion, but none allowed attachment to become ownership. They loved without clinging, served without vanity, gave without demanding return. To them, detachment was not rejection of life, but acceptance of its nature, fleeting, fragile, borrowed. The old self insists on permanence. The new self builds on impermanence with dignity. Why does detachment matter for transformation? Because the old self resists death by pointing to its possessions. You cannot destroy me, it whispers, for I am your comfort, your relationships, your recognition. To cling is to keep the old self alive. Detachment breaks this spell. Seneca practiced this by rehearsing loss. He told Lucilius, he robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming beforehand. By imagining the death of a child, the loss of wealth, the exile from Rome, he weakened attachment. He did not love less. He loved more fiercely because he knew each bond was temporary. Modern life magnifies attachment. Advertisements tell us we are incomplete without possessions. Social media tells us we are invisible without approval. Careers demand identity be built on titles and income. The sabotaging mind drinks this poison gladly, building the self on what can be lost in a moment. Detachment is rebellion. To rebuild yourself, you must refuse to tie your identity to what fortune controls. Instead, as Epictetus urged, tie it only to what cannot be taken. Your reason, your choices, your virtue. Detachment also reshapes grief. The old self sees loss as destruction. The new self, trained by Stoic wisdom, sees loss as natural. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good." Grief becomes gratitude when viewed through detachment. To love without illusion is to love more purely. To lose without collapse is to honor what was real. The old self wails endlessly at change. The new self bows to it with calm. There is also a connection between detachment and courage. The man who is attached to wealth will not risk his fortune to act justly. The man attached to reputation will not speak truth when it offends. The man attached to comfort will not endure hardship for growth. The old self sabotages virtue through chains. The new self breaks them by detaching. Epictetus reminded, if you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Only detachment from opinion grants freedom to pursue wisdom. Practicing detachment does not mean discarding everything, but using everything as though it were borrowed. Seneca explained, we must love all things as if we are going to lose them. Use wealth without pride, love people without ownership, enjoy comfort without dependence. This posture frees you to rebuild. The old self is enslaved by its loves. The new self loves freely, knowing that virtue alone endures. Practical exercises of detachment are essential. Refuse unnecessary luxuries for a time. Imagine losing what you fear most and rehearse how you would endure durably. Speak truth, even when it risks reputation. Give without expecting return. Each act loosens the grip of the old self. Each act strengthens the freedom of the new. Marcus Aurelius practiced this by treating even emperorship as dust. Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died, and the same thing befell both. If kings and peasants alike dissolve into earth, why cling so tightly to what separates them? The weight of attachment is heavy, but detachment makes you light. The old self drags its treasures, terrified of loss. The new self walks freely, ready for change. Epictetus compared life to a ship anchored in port. You may gather shells on the shore, enjoy the sea breeze, but when the captain calls, you must leave immediately. If you cling to your treasures, you will be dragged aboard weeping. If you live detached, you lead serenely. The captain is fate, the departure is death. To detach is to prepare. Thus, the sixth Stoic insight is this: destroy the old self by breaking its chains of attachment. Possessions, reputation, approval, use them, enjoy them, but never build yourself on them. Rebuild the new self on reason, on virtue, on clarity. Love more fiercely by loving without illusion. Act more bravely by detaching from outcomes. Live more freely by remembering that everything is borrowed. As Marcus wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Detachment is that realization turned into life. The old self does not die once. It resurrects every morning, every time comfort calls, every time fear whispers, every time distraction lures. To destroy it permanently is impossible, for it lurks like a shadow. But the Stoics taught that daily rebirth is possible, that each day you can choose to kill the weaker self and build the stronger. Seneca reminded us, begin at once to live and count each separate day as a separate life. This was not poetry, but strategy. If each day is a life, then each dawn is rebirth, each dusk a death. The man who practices this will not be enslaved by the past nor paralyzed by the future. Marcus Aurelius began his mornings with this discipline. In his meditations, he often scolded himself at dawn. At dawn, when you rise unwillingly, have this thought, I am rising to do the work of a human being. He knew that hesitation was the voice of the old self, the self that preferred warmth, ease, oblivion. To rise anyway was to begin the day by destroying that voice. Each morning was his battlefield. Each rising was victory. Epictetus instructed his students to imagine life as a role in a play. Each day you are called on stage. Sometimes the role is brief, sometimes long, sometimes noble, sometimes common. But your task is the same. Play your role well today. Tomorrow is not promised. The old self whispers, I will change later. The new self replies, later does not exist. Today is the stage. By grounding transformation in daily action, Epictetus destroyed procrastination, the favorite weapon of the old self. Daily rebirth is also about refusing to be chained by yesterday. The old self thrives on guilt and regret, replaying past mistakes until you drown in them. But Marcus reminded himself, do not let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason you have today. What about the past? The Stoics insisted it no longer exists. Yesterday's failures belong to yesterday. Today, you can rebuild. Each morning, the old self of yesterday must be buried, whether he was weak or strong, cowardly or brave. Today is a new man's chance. This discipline demands ritual. The Stoics did not drift through mornings casually. Marcus wrote to himself. Seneca reviewed his conscience. Epictetus lectured his students at dawn. These practices were not accidents. They were shields. The old self attacks most fiercely at the threshold of each day. To meet it unarmed is folly. To meet it with reflection, writing, meditation, or silence is to begin rebirth deliberately. The man who begins the day without discipline has already surrendered half the battle. But rebirth is not only morning, it is hourly, moment by moment. Every decision is an opportunity to destroy the old you and affirm the new. Seneca scolded himself for lapses but never allowed them to multiply. He returned immediately to discipline. Epictetus urged his students to treat every impression as a chance to train. If anger rises, practice patience. If desire tempts, practice restraint. If fear paralyzes, practice courage. Each act is rebirth. Each act is destruction of the old. The modern world resists this discipline by drowning us in endless time. We are told there will always be tomorrow, another chance, another year. We act as if immortal. But Seneca mocked this illusion. You are living as if destined to live forever. Your own frailty never occurs to you. You don't notice how much time has already passed, but squander it as though you had a full and overflowing supply. The old self loves this lie. The new self lives each day as its own life, with urgency and focus. Daily rebirth also reshapes ambition. The old self dreams of grand futures, success, wealth, recognition, yet does nothing today. The new self shrinks focus, virtue today, discipline today, clarity today. Seneca insisted, it is not that life is short, but that we waste much of it. Waste comes from postponing the good. Rebirth begins by asking, what small act today will make me stronger, freer, more just? Ambition becomes grounded, real, immediate. The old self speaks of decades, the new self speaks of today. There is humility in this discipline. Each day you begin again. You are never finished, never perfect. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, admitted daily failure, yet he did not despair. He rebuked himself, forgave himself, and began again. To destroy the old self is to admit it will return tomorrow, and to resolve to destroy it again. This humility is strength. For the man who believes he is finished has already surrendered to pride. The man who begins daily remains alive. To practice daily rebirth, you must design rituals. Begin with silence, 10 minutes of reflection, writing, or prayer. Remind yourself of mortality. You could leave life right now. Name the virtues you wish to embody today: courage, justice, wisdom, temperance. Set one act of voluntary hardship, fasting, cold, discipline, to sharpen your soul. At night, review your actions honestly, bury the old self, and rest ready to rise anew. This cycle is the Stoic path. Thus, the seventh Stoic insight is this: the destruction of the old you is not a one-time event, but a daily discipline. Each morning you rise to kill the weaker man, and each night you bury him. Each day is a complete life. Each life is a chance for virtue. The old self delays, regrets, and postpones. The new self acts, forgives, and begins again. Rebuilding yourself alone means accepting that transformation is not final, it is daily rebirth. The journey of destroying the old you and rebuilding yourself alone is not about becoming someone admired by the crowd. It is about becoming someone governed by reason, shaped by virtue, and free from the sabotage of fear, desire, excuses, and attachment. The Stoics never promised that transformation would be easy. They promised only that it would be worth it. For the rebuilt self is not chained by what fortune gives or takes. He stands rooted in himself. Marcus Aurelius, weighed by the empire, surrounded by betrayal and plague, still found peace in his own mind. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts, he wrote. The rebuilt Marcus was not emperor but philosopher, not ruler of Rome but ruler of himself. Seneca, surrounded by wealth and politics, could withdraw into simplicity, fasting, rehearsing poverty, destroying dependency each day. Epictetus, born a slave, limping from cruelty, rose above his circumstances because he built freedom inside. These were not perfect men. They were daily rebuilders. The rebuilt self is forged in solitude. He does not need applause to act justly, nor witnesses to live with discipline. He knows that the old self thrives on the crowd's gaze, but the new self grows in silence. He does not wait for others to approve his transformation. He approves it himself by living rightly. He may be mocked, misunderstood, or ignored, but he is unshaken, for his foundation is not opinion, but truth. The rebuilt self is also resilient. Hardship comes, but he has rehearsed it. Poverty strikes, but he has little with little by choice. Insult arrives, but he has trained patience. Loss cuts deep, but he has loved without illusion. Death approaches, but he has rehearsed mortality daily. Where the old self collapses, the rebuilt self endures. Seneca observed, fire tests gold, adversity tests brave men. The rebuilt self does not fear fire, he walks into it, for it reveals what he has become. The rebuilt self is free. Free not in the sense of doing whatever he pleases, but free from slavery to what pleases. He can enjoy wealth without being owned by it. He can taste praise without needing it. He can love fiercely without clinging desperately. He can work tirelessly without being chained to results. Epictetus described this freedom clearly. No man is free who is not master of himself. The rebuilt self is master, not servant. But the rebuilt self is not selfish. The Stoics insisted that transformation was not merely for private peace, but for public good. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that men were made for cooperation, like hands or feet. The old self thinks only of comfort, status, gain. The new self acts with justice, aware that he is part of a greater whole. He is rebuilt not to escape the world, but to serve it better. Alone he trains, among others he acts. The process of rebuilding never ends. The old self returns daily, whispering excuses, offering comfort, reviving fears. But the rebuilt man expects this. He does not despair when weakness returns. He confronts it again, destroys it again, rebuilds again. Each day is demolition and construction. This endless labor is not a burden but a privilege, for each day is a new chance at freedom. Marcus reminded himself, do not expect Plato's republic, but be content if even the smallest thing is achieved, and consider it no small matter. Each small act of virtue is a stone in the new foundation. Modern men seek shortcuts, instant transformation, immediate mastery, sudden rebirth. The Stoics would laugh. They knew that true rebuilding is slow, patient, daily. It is not found in slogans, but in sweat, not in appearances, but in actions. Seneca told Aurelius, philosophy is not a trick to catch the ears of the multitude. It is not devised for show. It is an art to be practiced, not a thing to be talked of. The rebuilt self is not loud. He is steady. So what does it mean to destroy the old you and rebuild alone? It means letting habits die, enduring hardship, embracing solitude, practicing reflection, detaching from illusions, and beginning again each day. It means admitting that no savior is coming. You must sculpt yourself. It means carrying the pain of demolition and the patience of construction. It means choosing the harder road, because the easy one belongs to the old self. Thus, the final Stoic insight is this: transformation is not a single event, but a lifelong discipline. The old you will return, kill him again. The new you will falter, rebuild him again. Alone, in silence, with reason as your guide and virtue as your goal, you can live as the Stoics lived, unmoved by fortune, unbroken by hardship, unchained by illusion. And when death finally arrives, you will not regret, for you will know that each day you destroyed what was weak and built what was strong. The old you must die, not once but daily. The new you must rise, not perfectly but persistently. This is the Stoic path. This is inner transformation. Now, if any part of this message has been helpful to you, leave us your like and comment, helping the algorithm recommend it to someone who needs it at this time. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new videos, And if you look through the videos we've already uploaded, you're sure to find something to take with you. Have a good day.